We kick off our 2023 squad analysis here with the Broncos. We have Scoop on board. This is his spreadsheet. He's gone through all of that effort to get these spreadsheets up to scratch. I know a lot of you are keen to grab onto these, and you will see them eventually. You obviously see them in these videos, but he will be able to give them to you to have a look at as we get through a bunch of these and get cranking. Welcome, Scoop. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty well, thanks. It's fantasy season now. It's January. Some of the other podcasts are starting to come out. I'm keen to get cracking. It's really good.
Good stuff. All right. So seeing this is your spreadsheet, get us cranking here with our Broncos squad. We've got plenty on this page. Can you explain a little bit of what's going on here?
Yeah, well, I have all of the club's top 30. So all of the relevant players that'll usually play in the starting 17, plus a couple of others, and a few more that you can sort of look for if there's a couple of injuries without having to go digging really that much. So the way the colours work here is down the bottom, I have the draw. You can see I've broken it up into early season, then origin, and then run home. I did a poll a few weeks ago to see what we reckoned a predicted ladder for next year would look like, and colour-coded that as difficult opponents, top 4 as the red ones, the 5 to 8 as the yellow, the finals contenders but probably miss out as the green ones, and then the really soft ones, the spoon contenders in blue. So for the Broncos, you can see they got a difficult start. They're very likely to go 2-0 losses, I'd say, but then they've actually got a reasonably soft run. So they're actually kind of an interesting team a couple of weeks into the season if your pods go down or there's a couple of injuries. But anyway, the other colours up the top are to represent if a player has been inflated or discounted, like I went through in my previous videos. We can see Selwyn Cobbo's been inflated about 3 points. DeLuise Herta has been discounted a fair bit because he only played a few games, and same with Dane Mariner.
Awesome. Yeah, so just a quick one on that draw then. So if we are looking at Broncos players early, they've got 2 hard ones, Panthers and Cowboys, who were top 4 teams last year. Would you be just looking, not to worry if you are bringing in mids and hookers and these types of players? Like, it's not really going to affect too much, you'd think?
I think for most players, it won't have huge impact. I mean, you've got those 2 rough weeks to start, so that'll get a lot of base stats anyway. But particularly for certain players who like to go on a bit of a run or score the odd try, get a bit of attack, those soft games will actually possibly be good for them. It just might lower their tackle count and their base just a fraction, but up their attack. So it depends who you want to go for.
Right. So just pretty early on then, I'm probably looking to stay clear of a bunch of the outside backs in the Broncos. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of them are either gone or have been priced up a little bit. You can see Selwyn Cobbo's, instead of being 39 points price at his average, he's actually nearly 43 points, over 600k to start the year. And although there is that soft stretch a little bit later on, I really don't think there's any value there.
Yeah, I think that's way too much when you can get Brian Toto at a similar price, I believe. So, yeah, and like really, apart from him, there's really no other outside backs you'd probably pick anyway. So it's going to be an interesting team. The biggest thing I want to point out early is the fact that they don't really have a 9. So I was having a bit of a laugh. I kind of like Jock Madden. It'd be interesting to see if they even try to mold him as a 9, for example. They've got Billy Walters, Corey Pakes, and then Madden, who they might play a little bit of time there. We just don't really know. I know you mentioned it was pretty silly. What are your thoughts on that whole scenario?
Look, in NRL-wise, it's really, really going to hurt them. They've pretty much got the weakest hooker rotation in the comp. Corey Pay, as a fantasy option, he might be all right. He's very cheap, but then again, he'd need a good share of those minutes because his scoring rate's pretty low. Similar for Walters, but he's more expensive. So fantasy-wise, I wouldn't touch them, but NRL-wise, it might hurt their go forward as well and their creativity.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just a quick one on this, everyone that's watching, we've got the status here. So he's actually popped, if there's a potential for them to be a decent option, he's got a void on there. So a bunch of these guys that you're just looking to avoid from day dot. They just don't have the fantasy pedigree. They aren't, looking like they're going to have a bit of value behind them. That's generally what we're putting there. And there's obviously a bunch that we're going to be looking at. He's got Injury Watch. He's got Unblooded. There's a couple for Team List Tuesday dependent. So it's obviously pretty early in the preseason. We're going to find out a lot more as we go along. But just as a general status right now, that's what we're looking at with a bunch of these players. And you can see those ones in bold. He's got as some interesting options there. You've got Pat Carrigan there as a possible keeper. Farnworth as a smoky. You've got Payne Haas as a premium. But actually, while we're on Payne Haas, do you want to speak about his situation a little bit at the moment, Lockie?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The drama wheel at the Broncos keeps going down in preseason. With his mum being involved in that horrible car accident, he's taken a couple of weeks of leave away from the Broncos camp, I think until January the 16th. And it's just a matter of whether it goes to his head, whether it affects his performance on field, or whether that revs him up. It's a terrible thing for him to happen in real life. Obviously, it's never a good situation, but some people will look to say that'll help him get revved up and he'll do really well, and some people will steer away because of the ongoing drama. Yeah,
it's very sad to see. My thing with him at the moment is the fact that he keeps getting those. He's got some niggling injuries. He had something to do with he rolled his ankle as well in recent, like a few weeks ago as well.
Yeah, I think sometime in December he rolled his ankle again, and he hurt his shoulders and ankles a few times last year, and I was hoping he could be all fit and firing with no worries, back to the high points per minute Haas we know and love. But there's a lot of little negatives that are building up slowly that pushing me away from Haas personally, but I can see why you would still start with him.
Yeah, and I suppose the only good thing about it all is it is still very early in the preseason. He's hopefully get his body right, because last year it just wasn't. So if he can get back to full health there, I think there's definitely some value at some point in the season, whether it's round 1 or maybe it's round 4 or 5. We will work that out as we go. Where do you want to go next with this, Loggy?
I'll start with a little bit left on that topic, and then I might just go alphabetically. On the Haas and Carrigan note, one thing that will help their stats and possibly their minutes is Cobry Hetherington tore his bicep. So he's one of their big minute bench props, and that'll need to be swallowed a little bit by the main guys, but also some of the fringe players like potentially Palacia or Piakura maybe. Corey Jensen could also be one to pick up those minutes, and it'll just be interesting to see who gets the most minutes and the most benefit out of that in round 1. But yeah, going from the top, there's a few players who just aren't really fantasy relevant and not keepers. They've played the same role for years, like Jesse Arthurs. You don't want to buy a 400k player who averages you 30 and doesn't do anything for the season. That's why I've got him as an avoid. Similar to Kurt Capewell, a little bit below him. He's just going to do the same as he did last year, avoid. Bayless is probably too fringe and it will require too many injuries to get in. As I was saying before, Pat Carrigan stands to benefit a little bit from this drama with Hetherington and Haas dramas. He might pick up some more minutes. In 2020, I think it was, he was averaging really, really big minutes at lock. I think it was like 68 minutes a game and averaging over 60. I don't know if he'll get that high, but I do see a little bit of a bump for him at least.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I see him as averaging close to Payne Haas this year, but that's just based on, Payne just not having a big stretch with no injuries and with Pat improving as a player. We saw what he did in Origin last year. That's probably the only worry with those two is the potential for injuries. Carrigan's had a bunch himself, and they have Origin coming up. So they're both guys that I'll delve deeply into as well when I get into the gun mids. But yeah, very interesting. So we spoke a little bit about Cobbo. Do you want any more comment on him? I think he's an avoid for this stage, like you said yourself there.
Yeah. He's priced in. I don't think there's really much to get out of him, even with that soft draw. Farnworth is a little bit cheaper, average similar. He had a cracking World Cup and did really well. I think Reece Walsh has got the fullback jersey down pat, but if anything goes wrong, I would say Farnworth is next to just fill in the gap while he's out. And with that soft draw, especially with Dragons and Dolphins in round 3 and 4, if Farnworth starts okay and you have an injury in the first couple of weeks you need to get rid of, he might not be a bad option to bring in. I'm a little bit less hot on him than I was when I first made the Broncos sheet, but he has definitely got some upside.
That makes sense.
Flegler, yeah.
He could be around 3 or 4 kind of entrant there. because he definitely has some keeper. He can definitely get to keeper territory. I think for me with him, any outside backs in this squad, Reece Walsh, him, the Broncos need to make a leap. I think for them to be really
Yeah, they
relevant.
definitely do.
Because Farnworth could average 45 for sure. He's super talented. So definitely there. All right, Flegler for me as well. He's kind of that middle. He's not going to be a keeper. Yeah, there might be a time of the year where he has a good run of 50s, but definitely an avoid.
Yeah, he might get a few more minutes with the Fords leaving and Haas dramas and Hetherington, but it's not going to be enough. He'll just do Tom Flegler things like he always does. Good player, but not really good fantasy player.
Yeah, we'll just move straight to Howder. Do we think he gets a spot in the back line or no?
I think he's pretty close. Hoda and Mariner both played a couple games at the back end of last year when there were some players out. I think when Farnworth went down with that long-term injury, one came in and then the other. So whoever out of the two does end up replacing either Farnworth or just a backline position, as long as it's probably not wing, I'd say they're a good shout to make some value as long as they're there for a few weeks.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jensen, again, not too much to talk about with him. He's probably just a little bit too expensive at this point to be any worth for any of our teams. We'll move to Jockey Madden. Yeah, I just find him as a very interesting one. He can score well. If he gets an opportunity at 6 or 7, if they try to blood him a little bit at 9 with that gap there, I can see him playing a part at some point of the season. And not too expensive at 418. What do you think, Locke?
Yeah, I've got a half an eye on him too, because if he does end up getting that 5'8" role next to Reynolds at any point with Ezra Mam out, or just for some reason goes ahead of him in the pecking order, I reckon he's got quite a good amount of value in him. Whether it's 10 points is debatable, but there's definitely some there. Reynolds is pretty dominant stat-wise, so I wouldn't guarantee it as a cash cow. So one to watch for, but if he spends some time at hooker as well, it could be worth picking up. It'll be interesting to see where he sits in the team, whether he's a 14 or just sits outside the team until there's an injury.
I think he just definitely has to replace Reynolds, or it's the 9 position, because if he plays with Adam, he's probably going to average a 30, 33. It's just not enough. If he plays with Mam, he'll be the dominant kicker, I'd say, at this point. So that'd be exciting. Ezra, so comes in at 502k. Is he just too expensive?
Yeah, he's too much. As we were talking, similar to Madden, Reynolds just dominates. I think when Mam was playing on his own without Reynolds, I think he averaged high 40s. But until that happens, he's just not going to be relevant any time during this year.
Yeah. You spoke about Mariner there. He's obviously really cheap. So if he gets an opportunity and sees some improvement, then it's probably a little bit scary to start with, but could be someone you could pick up straight, like pretty early if you see some natural improvement and Broncos are doing well.
Yep, I think so.
Yeah, it's a hard one. We'll find out a little bit closer. We got Blake Moser. There's been a little bit of talk around him just for the fact that he's a young gun coming up and they don't have a number 9. You spoke a little bit about him. Can you tell the viewers about that one?
Yeah, well, he's up and coming. He's base price. I don't know if we'll see much of him this year, but in definitely the next few years to come, I think we'll be seeing a lot of him. He's a really good player. Tyson Smoothie, I think, is also in and about the squad since I've done this.
Okay.
But I don't think we'll see them to start the year at least.
Yeah, and another interesting thing you've got there is when they're signed up until. So there's a few of these guys that are having contract years. So we do see a lot of uptick in efforts sometimes when player is on a contract year. So very interesting to know. But also good to know they've got Moser there until the end of 2025. So they'll obviously see a little bit in him. I know a lot of the young fellas don't get huge contracts like that. So that's, some faith. But yeah, as you said, whether it's this year, but we'll talk about him if it comes to that, midway through the year anyway. Okay, yeah. We got Oates. He's just too expensive as well. Happy to just leave him.
Yeah, I mean, he scores slightly better than the other wing fullbacks, but he's not a keeper. He's just not really relevant unless he goes to very, very close to base price.
Yeah. And what are we looking for with Corey Pakes? Are we looking for him to be in I think we needed him to have a 60-minute role, right? His PPM's pretty poor.
Yeah, he really needs a good minute split. I don't think he's actually going to be relevant. I think he's a little bit of a trap as it stands, unless he gets close to that 60-minute role, as you're saying. Billy Walters is a little bit similar, but he is more expensive. I think I heard at some point a few weeks ago that they might be looking to have Walters on the bench in case halves go down during the game, so he's a bit fresher and can go into the halves. That might be good for Pace, but it's all speculation. We have to watch for trials at least.
Yeah, so then both of them, they're a bit awkward. I definitely think Pakes is a good call for a trap. Billy, you'd probably want to be a little bit cheaper before you picked him up anyway, unless he was getting an 80-minute roll. Then I don't think he's worth it. All right, we got Palacia. So we saw him play a lot of minutes in certain stages last year, and yeah, there were games where he'd absolutely smash it. He'd get a 50 or a 60, and then he'd play big minutes and he'd get like an 18. So is he just a trap as well at this point of the year?
At the moment, unless he starts a prop, I don't want a bar of him. He could be someone to pick up a few minutes with Hetherington out, but I don't think it'd be enough as it would stand. I found out when I was looking that whenever Flegel was injured, Palacia was prop, but Palacia is leaving next year, and I don't know if they'll actually put somebody who's leaving in there with a big role instead of trying to put somebody who they know is going to be there for the future of the Broncos.
Yeah, that usually happens, doesn't it? Unless they're an absolute superstar. But you even saw what happened with Brandon Smith this year. I don't know if he was, not up to his standards or if it was just the way that the Storm wanted to play with him going away. But even a superstar like him didn't score as well in that year when they've already signed. Jordan Pereira, a bit too expensive. He was interesting last year. He's obviously a great scorer, but at 451, he's a no. Piakura, he potentially could get some space on a bench. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think he's down for some bench minutes. Probably not enough. The thing is, how long do the Broncos persist with Jordan Ricky? Like, I'd say Piakura has to be at least reasonably close to Ricky in some parts. Okay. And if he starts at some stage, he's an instant buy. But until then, probably not.
Yeah, and with Hosking moving on, he might be a bit closer to that spot, which is cool.
Yep.
Do we know much of Quay Ward?
I think he's pretty much depth and up and coming. I don't think we'll see much from him this year. He's an outside back. They've got plenty of really good ones to fill in if there needs to be, like Hota and Mariner.
Okay. And Reynolds averaged 49.6 last year. Do we see some interest in him at all in this team?
I've got some interest. I know fantasy amateurs have him as a bit of a trap. I am a little bit more bullish on him. I think he can do pretty well because before he had that hip injury, I think it was that osteitis pubis. Yep. It's sort of a lingering injury. If he can shake that with a full preseason to recover, I think he can go back to doing a lot better and probably creep into the 50s, maybe even mid-50s. I don't know if he'll get quite as high as 58, but I'd say that's his ceiling if he keeps scoring a couple of tries.
Yeah, he was scoring super well, so he definitely could do that again. But I think the Broncos need to improve for him to get there. Jordan Ricky, obviously not too much of a fan of at 571. He's not going to be a keeper, so I think we should avoid him. Guys, we got TC Rabadi. What's your thoughts on him?
Rabadi, not very good now that he's been stood down until his case later this month.
Oh, okay.
I just wait and see on him at the very least. I doubt he'll do a lot.
Yeah. So
he might benefit a little bit from the mids crisis if he gets off, but for now, not really one to look at.
That's fair. Katoni Staggs, are we seeing him as maybe a slight trap? Given a lot of people know who he is. He's obviously really an electric scorer of the football. At 37 average, do we think he can improve on that?
I don't think he can do much, but he'll be one of those people who'll score 20 for 3 weeks and then all of a sudden score an 80 and everybody will think he's wonderful and bring him in as a top shelf keeper. But he does that all the time. He's very inconsistent, a little bit like a Xavier Coates, who if you score a million tries, make a lot of attacking stats, he'll score 50 plus and then go back to mediocre scores.
Yeah, he just doesn't have the base, does he? Which is frustrating. Someone I definitely have some interest in, but is at a very awkward price, is Reece Walsh at 529k and an average of 37, playing with the Warriors, who aren't as good of a team. He moves to the Broncos. He does lose the goal kicking, unfortunately, unless Reynolds goes down. What are our thoughts on Reece?
Yeah, with Reynolds, I don't like him very much. I think he's probably got 5 points of value in him, but not much more. His attack will go up a lot at the Broncos, but the thing is, he's not necessarily the focus in attack now because the Broncos have a lot more weapons than the Warriors, so not guaranteed that he'll get such a massive jump. And he loses, I think it's 4 points in goals, and he'll probably lose a good couple more points in kicking meters because he shared quite a few with Johnson at the Warriors. So I think he'll have a few points of value, but I don't quite know if it'll be enough at his awkward price.
Yeah, you probably see him kick just a tad, wouldn't you? Like just as a left foot change up. But yeah, Reynolds is such a good kicker of the footy that you doubt he would get much use there. So yeah, very interesting stats there. Thanks, Lockie. We got Billy Walters we spoke about, and then just Xavier Willison would round it out, and he's an avoid for now, which we might hear a little bit about soon. And you said someone else got signed, didn't you say? So we got 2 more to fill that 30 over the next month or so before round 1.
Yeah.
Anything much else to say on the Broncos at this stage?
At this stage, I'll probably have them missing out. They might even get 9th again. They really, really need a better hooker option to get into the top 8. I think they've got a few weapons, but with the drama and Walsh really being their only household name signing, I don't think they're going to go up this year. I think they might even slide a little bit.
Yeah, I'd assume he'd have to have a pretty substantially big year for them to do something in that top 8. Yeah, the rest of them don't really stand out to me. You've got obviously Carrigan and Haas up top, and then you're holding it together with guys like Capewell and Reynolds, and then Reece Walsh has to fire. So yeah, very interesting squad. I wouldn't be too keen, as I said earlier in the video, on the outside backs early on, just so we don't know how they're going to play. Last year they all started pretty well and then really fell off, and a lot of the players scored pretty poorly during that time. But yeah, obviously some young guns in Selwyn Cobbo who could be of interest. Obviously great to watch in footy, but fantasy-wise, there's not too many of these guys I'm super keen on other than maybe Patrick Carrigan at this stage. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd say it's look for the premiums, and that's about it. Haas and Carrigan, and Haas is a little bit dodgy depending on whether you think he'll get revved up or whether he'll have it affect him. So as it stands, some potential value in the Broncos, but not much certainty.
Yeah, and then a complete wait and see on the 9 position, which hopefully we'll find out a little bit more in the next month or so. So guys, that's the Broncos. We're going to be going through the Dogs next.